As we leave this humble moment, we return again to the profound. Mr. Obama tells us, quote, "Evil does exist in the world. A non-violent movement could not have halted Hitler's armies. Negotiations cannot convince Al-Qaeda's leaders to lay down their arms. To say that force may sometimes be necessary is not a call to cynicism. It is a recognition of history, the imperfections of man, and the limits of reason." Truer words never spoken. But the fact that it took courage to speak these words to the Nobel Committee is a reason to refuse the award, not a reason to celebrate the man who deigned to speak them. Now, we get a view of how unapologetic he is about triumphant America. Quote, "Whatever mistakes we have made," I think we could have left that sentence out, speechwriters. Continuing, "The plain fact is this. The United States of America has helped underwrite global security for more than 6 decades, with the blood of our citizens and the strength of our arms. The service and sacrifice of men and women in uniform has promoted peace and prosperity from Germany to Korea, and enabled democracy to take hold in places like the Balkans. I think if I were defending America in the present day, I would have mentioned Iraq in that sentence. But that might seem too triumphant, or maybe a little too pro-Bush for that crowd. But then, to explain why we've borne that burden over the decades, we get this line, quote, "We believe that their lives will be better if others, children and grandchildren, can live in freedom and prosperity." It is at this juncture one might wonder whether, to avoid any suspicion of false humility, President Obama considered a different approach to the controversy surrounding his prize. Maybe he could have invited George W. Bush, or better yet, a real-life, living World War II hero, his father, to accept the award on behalf of the United States of America. Wouldn't that have made his point even better about the burden we've borne? But then he and Michelle would have missed another Calvin Klein moment in the spotlight. Returning to the speech, we're told, quote, "War itself is never glorious, and we must never trumpet it as such." Okay, deal. But really, when did someone last say that war is glorious? With or without trumpets blaring? Really, when? To complement our new way of thinking, we're reminded of President Kennedy's unforgettable call for a gradual evolution of human institutions. And we're told that all nations, strong and weak alike, must adhere to standards that govern the use of force. Uh-oh. Sounds like a man about to cede some of his country's sovereignty. So he covers that base in the very next sentence, telling us, "I, like any head of state, reserve the right to act unilaterally if necessary to defend my nation." Whew. But he remembers, "I'm a guest in Oslo, so," quote, "nevertheless, I am convinced that adhering to standards, international standards, strengthens those who do and isolates and weakens those who don't." Good save, maybe. But what are we and the rest of the world to conclude from that seesaw ride? And who, in this perfect world of international standards, gets to be the umpire, the arbiter of just and unjust? So, with our nation's respect for international laws duly noted, with a sovereignty carve-out, our president tries to remind the world again that the United States hasn't always been hated, reminding us that, quote, the world rallied around America after the 9/11 attacks and continues to support our efforts in Afghanistan because of the horror of those senseless attacks and the recognized principle of self-defense. Likewise, the world recognized the need to confront Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait, a consensus that sent a clear message to all about the cost of aggression. Nice. Another flagrant slight of his immediate predecessor. Only the first incomplete confrontation of Saddam Hussein makes the cut. George Bush's confrontation of that same invader can't be mentioned, lest the audience revolt. Oh, sorry, it did get mentioned, as everyone is aware of the antecedent of, quote, our actions in the following sentence. Furthermore, America, in fact no nation, can insist that others follow the rules of the road if we refuse to follow them ourselves. For when we don't, our actions appear arbitrary and undercut the legitimacy of future interventions, no matter how just. Just another version of I inherited this mess, you know? Followed shortly by another slight at his predecessor. Quote, I believe that force can be justified on humanitarian grounds, as it was in the Balkans. Yeah, but again, we can't mention the humanitarian grounds that were part of our rationale for going to war in Iraq. And now, President Bush, having been thrown in the ditch, we get an observation that is one of those teachable moments. The president tells us, in many countries, there's a disconnect between the efforts of those who serve and the ambivalence of the broader public. Now really, Mr. President, have you paused to consider your contribution to that ambivalence? And just when we think we're done with President Bush, we get the knockout punch. The first of two lines that brought applause from the crowd. That is why I prohibited torture. That is why I ordered the prison at Guantanamo Bay closed. That is why I have affirmed America's commitment to abide by the Geneva Conventions. We lose ourselves when we compromise the very ideals that we fight to defend. So we see that rather than embrace the policies of Mr. Bush that have protected us for 8 years, it is easier, more self-serving, for President Obama to refer to torture, Gitmo, and the Geneva Conventions, going for the self-aggrandizing applause line, thereby clearly and falsely accusing President Bush of war crimes.